and welcome back to my channel, Quest for Faith with Brian. And today I have a special guest on, Sara from Sara Says, and she's got a new YouTube channel that she started 3 months ago, 2 months ago, I think. And I saw a few of her videos, and I thought her testimony was awesome. And I just reached out to her and wanted to bring her on my channel to just talk about her conversion story and her faith journey and all those fun questions. So Sara, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, Brian, thank you so much for having me. It really is such a cool experience to be able to talk with other people about, this weird journey from being a Protestant to a Catholic. It's a very unique one. So
It very much is. And I felt like, for me, at least, I've moved from Texas to South Carolina since I became Catholic. So I've been to two parishes, but I don't run into a lot of converts. And so, like, actually being able to talk with another convert is, I feel like, even though I know there's a lot of us, and I feel like there's more and more all the time, but it's not like a normal thing you get to have a conversation about your conversion story. So it just,
yeah,
the growing pains of becoming Catholic, I'll call it. As
yeah,
there are
for
some.
sure, for sure.
So
Yeah.
first, let's kind of start off with why you decided to start a YouTube channel. And I'm curious to see if it's the same reason that I started mine originally, forever ago now. But yeah, why did you decide to do the YouTube channel?
Well, initially, the thing that kind of sparked it was my husband was tired of hearing me on very long soapboxes in the car about the Catholic faith. Um, he does love to talk about theology, but he would just stop talking and like count the minutes to like when I would stop talking. And it just seemed to go on forever. So he was like, maybe you need like an outlet where you can like use this kind of part of you that you're really passionate about and share it with people. And that's always been something I've been interested in. I've always been involved in ministry, and I've always loved to share with people and minister to them and lift them up. And I wanted to find a way that I could do that, around my busy schedule, like being a mom, owning a business, being, a wife and daughter-in-law, daughter, all that stuff.
Yep.
It's a lot of things that demand your time. So it's hard to be a very, very active volunteer at your parish because, you have other responsibilities. So this is kind of a way for me to do that in this season of my life. So
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And there's so many times where I'll see something pop up in the parish newsletter, and I'm like, oh, I should do that. And then my wife just looks at me like, no, like, you have way too much going on just at home, doing your own life. I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Like, because we have 24-hour adoration at our parish. And so they need like people to do it at like 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. And I'm like, I could totally do that. She's like, really? And then get up and go to work in the morning. I'm like, okay, maybe not. So yeah, I feel you. And to me, this was an outlet, right? The same thing where I started my channel. It was towards the end of lockdown, back in 2020. But it was like I felt like I needed to keep talking about it. And a lot of times for me, it's also, it gives me a chance to study more and to learn the faith better, right? And so when I'm doing a video and I have to do the research for the topic I'm doing it on, it's like, oh, okay, now I understand it a little bit better. So that's awesome.
yeah, yeah. It really it takes a lot to make a video, which the first video I did was just my conversion story, which was kind of off the cuff and terrible in like just all over the
Great.
place, I feel like. And now that I'm actually doing real videos and having to like make an outline and do the research and all of that stuff, it's time consuming, but it's definitely a joy to be able to really dig deep into some of those topics that pop up like in normal conversation.
Yeah, and you'll see something on social media you're like, I got to do a video on that.
Yeah.
All the time. Like
Yeah, for sure.
I have a list of things where stuff pops up. I'm like, I need to do more on that one. Yeah, and it is time consuming, but I think at the same time, it's kind of a way for us to do the Great Commission from the comfort of our home and fit it in when we can, you know. So yeah, I think it's definitely been a joy for me, and I hope it continues to be that way for you because I know you're new at this, but I could see the difference between the off the cuff and then the script. So,
Yeah.
but good job, you're doing great. So let's kind of dive into you. So I know you grew up Mennonite and then ended up in um not Presbyterian, I was going to go Pentecostal. But to me that was kind of a shocking shift, I thought, from what I know about those two denominations. But let's kind
Yeah.
of talk about your early faith journey when you're growing up.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I did start off in a Mennonite church. But there's such an array of Mennonite churches. There's really like really old order, wear cape dresses and like caps and drive horse and buggies type Mennonites. And then there's like all the way on the other end of the spectrum, like New York City super liberal Mennonites who like are just like on the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Um, so where I kind of sat was in this middle place where it was Mennonite, but it was starting to kind of modernize. In our particular church, more and more people were wanting to kind of bring it into like the modern day, like modern worship bands, modern like incorporation of Pentecostal things that were starting to really gain popularity in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And uh, with that came in this word of faith, um, what people would normally call prosperity doctrine, like
Hmm.
prosperity gospel. That really just came in through like a handful of people. We had a pastor change, and so the church was kind of naturally evolving in that direction. Um, and my dad was very, very, very into Kenneth Copeland. We had a TV in every single room of our house so that he could watch Kenneth Copeland in every room of our house. Literally in the bathroom. Like my dad could sit in his whirlpool tub and watch Kenneth Copeland from his
That is
bathtub.
something
Like,
special there.
yeah. So he was very, very into it. And not that he was very into the money side of it. It was really about the healing,
Hmm.
that kind of like believe, name it, claim it, healing part of it. My sister was born with a heart defect, and so it was very much like, you know, we're taking this to God, we're praying for healing and all of that. So we really kind of planted our roots in that kind of theology. And it was what I grew up with. All of my Sunday school classes were talking about, you know, the power of your words, speaking things over your family, speaking things into your life, um, and a lot of like kind of new age ideas that were just guised as Christian with Christian
Hmm.
lingo. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of what I grew up with. And I eventually moved out of that and started, well, started going to a more traditional Mennonite church that didn't have any of that in it, and simultaneously going to like a non-denominational evangelical church, because you know you go to like two churches a week, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have. I didn't really have a membership anywhere, so I was just going where my friends were going on the weekends.
Right.
But I moved out of the Word of Faith thing because, um, very long story short, my dad and I were in a car accident, and he hit his head on the steering wheel and lost all of his memory, basically. And because we were in the church we were in, they were like, you know, if we pray and like declare that he's healed, he'll be healed. And, he never was healed. He never was healed. And he lived in a nursing home for the rest of his life. And I kind of just got really disillusioned with that type of thinking, and kind of wanted to just move away from that. So
And
yeah, then when
that's
I got
hard
into
when
high school, I was
like the rubber meets the road with that, because I think that's coming from a good place of like God can do anything, right? Is where it's coming
yeah,
from. But there's life and there's his permissive will, right? And I think
right,
I've met other people that have gone through that same type of situation. I had a little sister that died of cancer when I was a kid, and I was Church of Christ, which is not prosperity gospel at all. But I still had friends or family members like, you just need to pray harder and she'll be healed, and and she eventually passed away, and it was kind of, I'm not gonna say it was devastating for my faith, but it kind of helped solidify my ideas around life and death, and how um, bad things can happen even if you do have faith.
hmm yeah, totally, totally. It Going through that kind of tragedy, it really, yeah, it puts your face to the fire and refines it in a different way than it would have normally been. And kind of like you said, like there's still this belief that God does heal and that He is a healer, and that all healing really does come from God ultimately. But God's not at your command, right? Like He does things in His own timing, and things play out according to His will and His bigger picture. And He's not waiting for us to say the magic words so that He can finally grant the healing He's been holding back. So yeah, I think there's definitely a difference there.
Yeah, and I think with the Catholic point of view on a lot of this, it's like the suffering helps you is for sanctification, right? And that's a totally different different view, and it's one that I like that view, right? Like, I'm going through this hard time or this difficult time because he's trying to make me be a better person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And um, that view is so life giving because it really allows you to not wallow in your suffering, but recognize it for what it is and give it back to God and ultimately put your trust in Him completely. And also, it gives you this ability to really um, uh, not sympathize, but empathize or kind of see the suffering that Jesus did on the cross as well. Like you can see the depths of that as you're walking through your own suffering
Hmm.
and realizing how much more He suffered with the weight of sin on Him on the cross. So it connects you in a certain way to that ultimate sacrifice, even just giving you a better perspective of God's love for us. So yeah, it's a lot more redeeming of a view than, if you suffer, you're doing something wrong.
Right. Or you're not, you don't have enough faith. That's why bad things are happening to you. And like, no,
Yeah,
that's not how it works. I'm sure Peter and Paul had plenty of faith and they still died. And
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So okay, so yeah, you were going through you had that accident with your dad, and so you kind of started moving away from that. So kind of what happened next?
Yeah, so after high school, I went to college and I got involved with, this is just like the story of a church hopper, but I got involved with a church that was like an emergent church. It was kind of very like a progressive Christianity. Um, not really for the theology, I was still pretty conservative in my theology, but just for the interesting ways that they did like liturgy or Sunday morning service, or just incorporated different things and opened the scope of what Sunday morning could look like. So I went to a really small emergent church. I got on staff there, and eventually it fell apart. It was a big church break, and it was devastating to everyone involved. The pastor ran away with all the money that we had collected for tithes for however long, and yeah, it was just a crazy mess. Um, and so I didn't really land back into another church full time, like going to a church, until I started going to the church where my husband's dad is a pastor.
Okay.
So I started going there regularly, kind of once that all the dust from all of that settled.
Okay. So what I know your brother became Catholic first, but
Mhm.
for you, like what was the first inkling of, is this Catholic Church thing right? Like what was the first thing that made you start going, okay, maybe my brother's not crazy?
Um,
Because I'm sure my
well, I'll
sister
say
thinks I'm
that.
crazy right now. So
um, yeah, so first when my brother became Catholic, I, at the same time, I was like, this is crazy, but also I had a very deep respect for my brother. I knew he really loved the Lord. I knew he knew his Bible. He is an incredibly intelligent person, knows lots of history. And the thing he said to me at first was, the Catholic Church lines up with what the history says more than, the Protestant church. And I was like, oh,
yeah,
I had never really thought of our faith in the context of history. I had only really thought of it in the context of like personal relationship with Jesus here and now. And I didn't really even know the depths of history that were available to us. So it kind of just made me go, and then I just like forgot about it and didn't care about it for years. Um, and then later, like maybe 4 or 5 years later, my brother, I was talking about Kenneth Copeland, talking about our family history and with the faith, and brought up Kenneth Copeland, and my brother was like, "Well, you do know he's a heretic, right?" And I was like, "What?" Like literally, the carpet was pulled out from under me. I was like, "You're just
that's not
telling me
right.
this now? How long have you known?" I don't know. Like, I had no idea. I had no idea. So it was really that moment and that conversation where I went back and I was like, okay, I need to look at all the pieces of this again, because literally everything I've built my faith on is apparently a heresy, and apparently many people know that it is a heresy. So like, what does this whole faith thing mean? So that's really when I started looking around, trying to figure out what was what, and I was really drawn to the stability of the Catholic Church. Just that the structure, the fact that um, in my Pentecostal churches, it's like everyone had a word from God, and everyone thought that word of God was authoritative in some way. It was very much feelings based, and having that like history, philosophy, theology, stability of the Catholic Church. It was something that really spoke to me, and the fact that I could go back in history and really see the receipts of these arguments that my brother was bringing forth to me and having conversations with me about was something that kind of led the way as I was like going through all of this. So
Yeah, I think for me, I felt that too with the Catholic Church. It's like my wife and I were talking about this a few months ago, but it's like there's a Catholic teaching for everything. Like the Catholic Church has dealt with, or I mean they've been around for 2,000 years, so they have experience with everything. And it's like, oh, you need a teaching about, I don't know what we were talking about. We were talking about I think we were talking about exorcisms and spirits and stuff like that. And like, well, there you can find a church father that talks about that, or you can find you name it, right? Like, and even the stuff that the Protestant churches are dealing with now, that's like old news for the Catholic Church. We're like, yeah, we dealt with that in the third century. Like,
yeah,
like It's kind
Yeah.
of crazy.
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many times I read a comment and I'm like, they already talked about it. Like, that's the reason they're not saying anything, because there's like tons and tons of information about it, like done in, the fifth or, third century or whatever. So
Right. We had two
yeah,
councils on that. Like,
yeah, it's not like it was dropped and everyone was like, oh yeah, you really got us there. Thanks for bringing that up. So yeah, I found that actually my senior thesis I did on the iconoclastic controversy in the early church, and kind of discussing all of the issues of like images and are they supposed to be used and everything. And not only did I learn a whole lot about it, but it was just interesting seeing the same controversy come up every couple hundreds of years.
mhm.
Like it started, really in the eastern part of the Catholic Church when a lot of Islam was coming in and kind of mixing, with the Catholics there. And in Islam, you're not supposed to have any images of
Right.
God at all, like no religious images of God. And it really started, that's how the controversy really began. And seeing that echoed again, in the Reformation, as, Protestants are starting to be like, oh, we really don't want all of these images in our churches. They're having the same argument. And people have the same argument now. So it's kind of interesting to see that how history can be lost.
Yeah. And if you don't study it, you're bound to repeat it. Right. And I think it's, and it sounds like you did the same for your journey too. When you start looking back, it's like I was trying to look for really good Protestant sources and really good Catholic sources when I was really starting to look at, okay, I think I have to be Catholic. But one of the things that I don't know if you found this, but one of the things I kept tripping up on a lot of Catholic issues was when a Protestant would refute a Catholic issue, there was zero source for it. They would never point back to so and so did this, or this is why we don't think Peter was the first pope because of X. And it was like I even bought a textbook from my alma mater, and like I've done academic papers and I've written a thesis. I know how to, like, you're supposed to, anything that's not your personal opinion, you need to back up with a reference. And this book has zero references in it at all. And I was just shocked, like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, if you're going to back it up, can you show me where this is at? And I kept running into that. Did you run into that too?
Oh, oh yeah. And actually, it's funny that you say that about references, because I did have this one book that was trying to argue that all of this stuff in churches is pagan, and they had a reference section at the back that is like super thick. And for any person who doesn't have any experience with like writing research papers or writing any kind of paper, like in an academic setting, I guess, they would look at this reference thing and be like, oh my gosh, they totally did their research. Like, this is awesome. This is such a really great historical resource. And I'm looking through it. I'm writing down, okay. They had no direct quotes from anyone before the year 500. And they're talking
Yeah.
about the early church. Like, no direct references. I think the first reference, they only had one reference, and it was to Augustine. And it wasn't even a direct quote. It was just like an idea he
A
had, and
paraphrase.
it was
Yeah.
just like kind of off to the side. But there are like tons and tons of primary sources in the first few centuries that it's like abundant. You could totally go to them and prove your point better if you use them. But like people who don't have experience in that academic world, they're gonna read that book and have no clue. Like they're
Yeah.
just gonna assume that it's really well written, it's got really good references in the back. And that's not to like downplay those people. That's not like a normal thing to know, right?
Yeah.
It's not like an everyman's knowledge. It's just because I have a degree in history, so I know to look for that.
Yeah.
Um, But
Yeah,
if
and
you don't
that's
know
how I was
sources,
trained too.
then
Even if I remember when I was writing my thesis, so say it was a theory that somebody wrote about in the 80s, I would still have to look at where they're referencing and find the original source. I might have to go back 3 or 4 sources to find the original source to prove my point in my thesis. I couldn't use anything that was referring to the original source. I had to use the original source.
yeah, yeah. And to your point, like different parts of history have written about history in different ways. So you
Hmm.
have to understand what influences those writers were under when you're reading their material to really get an understanding of the topic that they're covering. And that's just like another layer of interpretation, right? That's why it's so important to go back to those primary documents and read them and have direction, but know that people are coming from different perspectives when they're going through it. But
Yeah. So you start having these conversations, you start looking back into church history for the first time. What what was kind of one of the first things that shocked you? Did you have an aha like,
um,
oh my gosh? Because I have one, but I want to hear if you had one.
I'm trying to think. I think first time I had that moment, and this is kind of something small, but um, I was really trying to understand how salvation worked for Catholics. And I remember asking my brother, well, you guys believe baptism saves, right? And he was like, yeah. I was like, well, can people who are baptized go to hell? And he was like, of course they can. Like, duh. Like, of course they can.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. And it got me into that, okay, like what does salvation look like? And once I kind of realized, oh, this thing that I had assumed for so long was wrong, it's like, okay, well, what else have I assumed that's wrong?
Yeah, for me it was the Eucharist and the real presence. Because firm believer and it was just a symbol. And in the Church of Christ, like we did do communion every single Sunday, and you could only take communion if you'd been baptized. And so they did hold it in high esteem, but it wasn't the real presence. And so when I read Saint Ignatius of Antioch, and he just flat out goes, hey, if you don't think that it is the body and blood of Christ, you're not a Christian. I was like, what? Like, who is this Saint Ignatius guy? Like, how is he saying this? And then I find out that he was taught by the Apostle John, and he was appointed Bishop of Antioch by Peter. I'm like, well, this guy knows his stuff. Like, he knew the apostles. Like, it just blew my mind.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, totally. Just knowing that those people were so close to the apostles, yeah, it's just really cool. It's really cool that we get to have those resources available to read. And yeah, it's almost like you can touch them. They're so close.
For sure. So, what kind of what was the point in which you started really thinking like I need to join the Catholic Church? Like I need to do this.
Yeah. So um, the thing that kind of was the final straw was I was pregnant with my son, and I had put off converting and all of that for so long because I just wasn't ready. And the situation with my family was complicated. But when I was getting closer to having my son, I was like, oh my gosh, I could die in childbirth. Like, then I'm gonna have to answer to God, and it's me who has to answer to Him. It's not like my family. I'm
Hmm.
the one who's gonna stand before God and say, hey, yeah, I believed you about the Catholic Church, but I just never pulled the trigger because I was too afraid of all of this stuff. So anyway, that was really the catalyst for me in particular. I once I really, really had that epiphany, I went to my husband and asked him if I could seriously consider becoming Catholic. And I really wanted to make sure that I had his blessing, as a spiritual lead of our household. And so it kind of like moved forward from there.
Yeah, and I love that part of your story that you're talking about with, because your husband's is he looking at joining be the cat in the Catholic Church, or is he staying Protestant? Like you don't have to dive into it, but I know that that's
Yeah,
very complicated. And I was blessed that my wife and I were on the same page, right? Like we were very lucky
yeah,
in this, because I know there's a lot of people out there that are in your shoes where it's like I'm ready to go, they're not. And I think I don't know. I loved the way you speak about that, like uh wanting his blessing on it, and I thought that was awesome.
thanks. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's been a journey for sure. I I think ultimate like when and of course you know this because I'm sure you feel this with your wife, but when you marry someone, you marry the whole person. You love them and you want the best for them. And part of loving them is letting them take their time with this kind of thing, and never pressuring them or pushing them into something that they're not comfortable with.
Hmm.
Um, so I never wanted to do that. My husband was always aware that I had this attraction to the Catholic Church that, we used to joke one day, hey, one day if you die before me, I'll become Catholic. And so he always knew. We had always talked about Catholic stuff. My brother was Catholic, so we would discuss stuff that, my brother and I had talked about. And so he is not Catholic at this point. I pray that he does become Catholic, but I want to let him have the space to journey
Get
with
there
God
on
on
his
his
own.
own.
And I think that
Right.
is the right
And
call. And my wife did the same thing. I think she was more ready before I was. I think she was ready 2 or 3 months before I was at. And she kind of said, I knew that, like, I was going to lead where you're going to follow the family. Cause I don't know if you saw my whole video there on my conversion story, but she was talking, she's like, you're the spiritual leader. So I was going to follow you, but I was kind of ready to do the Catholic thing. And it took me another 2 3 months of researching all of these things that I thought the Catholic Church believed, to be able to, to cross the Tiber, so to speak. But it was her being a gracious wife and just giving me space to think and to tackle these issues on my own, because they're serious, big issues. When you look
yeah,
at the difference.
yeah, for sure. And, you can't expect people to um, like change their mind overnight, and I certainly don't expect my husband to do that. I respect him as a person. I want to give him, yeah, the freedom to choose what he wants to do, and not expect that he will be Catholic ever. Like I'm never going to
Yeah.
put that pressure on him. Ultimately, I'm entrusting him to the Lord, and the Lord's timing, and that's the hardest thing. Really, is just trusting that God's got it, that I'm not, the fourth person of the Trinity. I'm not like going to be the person who gets him to change his mind. He loves the Lord. We are in agreement on so many things. He totally loves and respects the Catholic Church, and it's an open dialogue in our relationship. And I'm really, really grateful that he is willing to look for the places of agreement over the places of disagreement. And he's 100% supported me in the midst of other people who have not been supportive of my choice. So
Well, I
there's
commend
no way
him
for,
100% for the support that he's given you. I think that's absolutely amazing. And I think, uh, You're right. It's one of those things where you just got to put it in God's hands, say a bunch of Hail Marys for him, and and hope someday it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But I think I think in today's age, I think women forget how great of a influence y'all can be on your husbands and sons, just by living your lives. And I've noticed this. I don't know. I always kind of say this when if someone has ever asked me, how do you know when you want to marry, when you're want to marry someone? It's like, well, when they make you want to be a better person. Like, and I think women have this innate ability to, um without necessarily, I'm not nagging or any of that stuff, but to influence and just live their lives in a certain way that can influence their husbands. So yeah, I think that's great. So with so you became Catholic after your son was born. I'm assuming is when did you come into the church?
I came into the church the spring of 2020, so right after the
Okay.
pandemic
So we were in
started.
RCI at the same time because I was like 2019 is that September I went to RCIA, and then we had to wait a whole year because we had to go through the enrollment process. So it was
Oh yeah.
2021 is when we got to actually join. So um and but okay, so you joined in 2021. What was what was the challenging parts for you when you officially are like, okay, I'm Catholic? Like, because it's so different than being Protestant.
Yes.
What have been some
Yeah.
challenges for you?
Yeah, I think the other than just like dealing with people who disagree, and just um, the difficulties with family and friends. That aside, I think the biggest thing is just the culture shock, right? You're coming from an evangelical background where community is kind of thrown in your face, whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
And like, there's a million different groups you can join, and there's really upbeat praise and worship every week, and Bible studies, and literally tons of stuff for you to do. And not that there's not stuff like in the parish life. There are many parishes who do have really great programs, um,
But
really
that's
great
not the
groups to
norm.
join. But yeah, I've seen that it's not the norm. Thankfully, our parish does have a couple of really great groups, and I go when I can go. Um, but I think those, and really just like I love praise and worship. So I really wish our parish had kind of like a modern music night,
Hmm.
not necessarily on Sunday mornings, but I just
Right. Not
love
during the
that
liturgy,
part of
but
it.
on the
Yeah,
side. Yeah. No, and
yeah,
there's the Church of Christ kid in me misses a cappella singing still. So like those songs that
yeah,
I sung in church growing up are the ones I would sing to my kids when I was trying to rock them to sleep. So yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I feel you on the music side of it.
I totally get that. Mennonites did that too. It's so beautiful. The a cappella singing is amazing, and it's such
Hmm.
a powerful experience too. Just all of the voices together.
Yeah, and
So
everybody knows their
yeah,
parts, and you got the basses, you got, um, yeah, it's fun, and I do miss that. Yeah, and
yeah.
your brother mentioned small groups, and I like almost did a backflip when I was watching your interview with your brother, and I was like, yes, yes, because I've literally my wife was like, you need to hold your horses, and we've only been in our parish for a year now, so she's like, you need to get more involved and meet more people before you start kicking in the door and asking if we could do a small group deal across the parish. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. But yeah, like there's things we can learn from our Protestant brothers and sisters, and that they do really, really well, that Catholics can definitely learn from.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of those barriers, like, is I feel like with Catholic small groups, they feel like maybe it has to be like someone who's really theologically sound who's leading it, who's like very educated. It's very like, you know, has to be more like a class, I guess, than a group,
Hmm.
like a small group. And it really doesn't have to be like, even just, I don't know if you guys have formed at your parish,
Yeah.
the like it's it's as simple as like opening your home, having like some cookies or whatever, and then watching a forms video and talking about it with a couple friends. Like, it doesn't have to be this whole big thing that's at the
No.
parish and there's a classroom setting and a teacher, and it doesn't need to be that. It's really about fellowship with people and talking about faith.
Yeah, exactly. And I like a lot of the churches I've gone to growing up, and even as an adult, like like the church would pick one study book, right? And everybody would read this book, and we'd go a chapter a week, and then we'd have questions at the end of it, and we would just discuss it, right? And you could easily pick a Catholic author, like easily Scott Hahn or somebody else like that, and just okay, this week we were talking about this, and I don't know, but name a great book. There's too many of them, and just have a discussion and fellowship together and have a meal. And I think
Yeah,
that can just really help your parish life just grow.
right, right. Yeah. And you don't even like, I'm planning on doing a video of like things introverts can do to make parish life better. Not that I'm an introvert, I'm not, but my husband is, and I kind of get like information from him about this kind of thing. But one of the things I was going to talk about is like, you don't even need to lead the group. You can just open your home to like having people over, and
Hmm.
if someone else wants to lead the group, that's great. Like, you're just the person providing the space that it becomes like a home away from home for people, and you don't even need to talk the whole time, right?
Yep, you can
So
sit and listen.
there are really so many ways that you can sow into the life of your parish and help it grow and help those relationships build without having to be like the person in the front of the room talking.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, no, I miss small groups. I'm gonna get our parish to do them. I don't know how, but I'm gonna
Yeah.
figure it out. I miss that. But no, so that's awesome. And I feel you on the family thing because I deal with that in spades on my end. So I totally get that. Um, awesome. So what else do you have coming up on your channel? So I think we've kind of talked through your journey there in a roundabout way, getting off topic a few times, but what else do you have coming up?
Yeah. So right now I'm working on a video about praying to the saints. So that's kind of where my brain is at, like in the current moment. But I'm really hoping to do more kind of short form, short, like answering people's questions, and then doing a lot more like diving into parish life. Like, how can we um, help parish life grow and thrive in our different facets, whether you're a stay-at-home mom or an introvert, an extrovert, whatever. Like, how can you personally step up your game and show up for your parish? So I think I'm going to start kind of going into those videos as well.
Awesome. No, I like that. That's a great idea. And it's something I wouldn't have thought of doing. I like that. No, because I think, and honestly, I think for you and your channel, um, you're in a great space, right? Like I think we need women's voices that are converts and your perspective because it's different than mine, and oops, there you are, you're back. And so yeah, I love what you've done so far, and so just keep it up. I think it's great. Um, but
Thank you.
I'll
And I
definitely
just
put the link down
interject here,
below
like,
so people can go check you out. Um,
oh,
for sure.
thank you. I appreciate that. And just echoing what you say, for all the women out there, like, I personally just think that it's so, so important for women in particular to know their faith and know it well, because they're the ones who are teaching children. Like they're teaching the next generation, and children learn from the adults around them,
Yep.
and they're around their mothers a whole heck of a lot, you know. And if my kids are seeing me worship the Lord, love the Lord, know His Word, know the church, you know, all of those things, they're going to learn that a lot more in the little interactions I have with them. So I'll probably do a video about that at some point. But yes, women knowing their theology, knowing the church, and loving the Lord wholeheartedly, that's what the church needs. So
100%. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And I really look forward to seeing what else you're going to be doing on your channel. So thank you very much for coming on.
thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.